You got my attention when I was searching YouTube for Bernie or Bust videos, and I found yours and listened to it, and I thought it was excellent. So my first question is, how did you find out about Bernie or Bust?
Well, on Facebook pretty much, because we're pretty active with social media, and we saw a lot of this Bernie or Bust movement, and really it intrigued us. I don't really remember a time when there was this much pushback on corruption in politics, on big money in politics. It's something that is really new right now, and it's really resonating with a lot of people. I think it's
I mean, and I think Bernie or Bust means different things to everyone. And to me, when I think of Bernie or Bust, it's not necessarily about the individuals or the groups of people that don't want to vote for the other candidate. I think it's more about a systematic bust. Either we take this big step now, or the system is in threat of busting. So it's more than just about a group of individuals. It's almost a metaphor for what may happen if Bernie Sanders doesn't get his chance in the White House.
Kind of like what Susan Sarandon suggested. If Donald Trump does get elected, the revolution will come our way, whether the corporate media sees it coming or not.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of I think it's a valid school of thought, because at some point, like Mike was saying, at some point, people are going to have to realize that a vote for the establishment, a vote for continuing corruption, doesn't change anything. The same establishment politics will continue. If we don't change the way we vote, then,
And one thing I haven't really heard a lot of, even in our groups, is the fact that if, let's say, Hillary does win, she could most likely be there for 8 years.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And that makes it that much more serious,
Right.
What's your concern with Hillary? What's your problem with having her in the White House for 8 years?
There's a lot of concerns. One, she calls herself a progressive, and we laugh at that notion. We don't believe her record or her rhetoric, spells out progressive,ism. Take a case like TPP, in which she supported many times all across the globe and sold it to many countries. We think that there's a very likelihood that she will reverse her current position right now and support it once she's in the White House. That's a big deal.
Yeah, my subscribers are well aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically what he's saying is she comes with a lot of baggage, and she doesn't, her actual positions don't match up with her political rhetoric as far as, I guess, who she claims she appeals to.
Right.
I sent you a link to an anti-Bernie or Bust blog post by a black gentleman who was concerned about the risk of seeing Donald Trump elected because he is a racist. There's no question about that. Would you speak about your concerns if Bernie doesn't get this nomination, and it's still a possibility he may or may not. The Bernie or Bust movement may actually help him, or may not. But if he doesn't get this nomination, and someone like Trump or Cruz is elected, does that not terrify you as Black Americans?
We actually talked about that today, and I think being scared of that is the wrong approach to take. I think only voting for an establishment candidate because the Republicans or the conservatives, may get in there and do the evil things that they do is the wrong direction to take. Right. But first and foremost, I want to thank you for sending us that little care package of an article, because there was so much in there to unwrap. And the irony is, actually, when I was reading the article, I didn't realize who it was, but when I got down to the bottom, I saw the guy's picture, and I actually got into it with him in another group we are in on Facebook. Now, it was respectful, but some of the argumentation he used within the thread is the same argumentation he used within the article, and it's typical of Hillary supporters. He uses a lot of fallacious arguments to make his points, and I think me and Will, as Black men, I think we've had enough of the Democratic establishment's fear mongering, because Republicans do it enough. They do it in regards to outsiders.
Right.
Like Democratic establishment is more like a intramural, they do it intramurally.
Yeah.
And so they
just do it in a different way.
They do it in a different way. They try to say, well, elect us. We may not be, the perfect party, but these Republicans over here, we got to stop them.
Yeah. Like Michelle Alexander said in her interview on MSNBC, it's like emotional blackmail.
Yeah.
They use this fear mongering to say, look, we're not as bad as the Republicans, but God help you if the Republicans get in. What are you going to do? And they use that as one of their main tactics for us to continuously vote for Democrats. But see, I see it as, look, they say we should fight against Republicans, but when are we going to start fighting against Democrats that don't work in our best interest?
That's a good question. I think the answer to that question is now. That's the whole point of Bernie or Bust, as I understand it.
That's correct. Yeah. Because if not now, then when? Like we were alleging, like you were saying, if Hillary is in office for 8 years, that just pushes any real change down the block. 8 years, maybe. It may be longer, because who knows what kind of candidates we're going to have then. So it's a real worry taking office.
Some people, like Sarandon, talked about Sanders being a once-in-a-lifetime kind of candidate. But if you look at the big picture of American history, it's really once in a nation's lifetime. There's never been this kind of serious political revolution before in the United States.
Yeah, if you look at his entire platform, it essentially promotes equity across the board in regards to, education, wages, healthcare, foreign policy in regards to Western imperialism. I mean, I don't recall in my lifetime, my short lifetime, of a candidate bringing all that to the table. Wall Street, campaign finance reform. When has a candidate brought all of that to the table? And what Bernie Sanders does, I like how he always says we, because in that interview with Morning Joe, he talked about the country's priorities needing to be changed. So it's we have to not only change how, Washington doesn't just need to change how they do things. We need to change how we see Washington and how they work for us. Yeah. So I like how he makes it like a we thing, and we need to get our priorities together.
I think it's interesting how, if Bernie wasn't in this race, and that goes with your suggestion that, he is a once in a nation type of candidate. If he wasn't in the race, let's say this was Hillary and Joe Biden, we wouldn't be having this kind of talk. We wouldn't be talking about money in politics, Wall Street, super PACs, even the TPP would be really downplayed a little bit because they're virtually the same type of establishment candidate. So Bernie really changed the narrative and put corruption at the forefront of everybody's minds. And that's what the whole Bernie or Bust movement is about, fighting back against it.
Michael, Will, I appreciate spending this time with me. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you for having us again.